just after 4 p.m. on Saturday, October 26th. And here we are with day 9 of 13 days of Halloween. I can't believe I've done 9 of these straight. I feel pretty good about myself. Tonight's actually going to be a double, except it won't be a Halloween thing. My regular show, Dylan Knows, is on Saturday nights at between 11 and 11:30, depending on when things get done in the evening. So if you're a new subscriber or whatever, check out my other show also. It might talk a little bit about Halloween stuff, but it mostly talks about what happened this week in pop culture. But not this show. This show is my special event that I'm doing for the 13 days of Halloween. And I'm on day 9, so I only got 4 days left to do stuff. And that's pretty cool. I'm pretty happy about that. I've been doing a pretty decent job of keeping up with things. This weekend, we're going to be focusing more on TV stuff. Today's episode is the top 35 spooky series. Tomorrow should be the top Halloween specials / episodes of TV shows that we're going to talk about also. So a lot of stuff still to come. And then I got my more personal sort of stuff. I've got my Halloween costumes, what makes Halloween great, my daughter doing a show also. So we got some still good stuff coming up, but these are the last sort of pop culture sort of things. As I drink my blood orange drink. So here we go. Real quick. It's the top 35 spooky series. This is my list. Where I put these items and these specific items, these are the ones that I picked. If your favorite is not on the list or is not where you thought it would be, then that's fine. You have your opinion. These are my opinion. The list is also fluid. It is not the be all end all. I can change it anytime I want to. This is not, set in stone. This is just for this moment in time. These are my top 35 right here. A new series might come out in the next year or so, a series I have never watched before. I might finally watch and get that in there, stuff like that. So that's one. Number 2, this is no animated series, so no real Ghostbusters, no gargoyles, stuff like that. Just because I decided to go more with just live action stuff, just because I wanted to do that and talk more about that than the cartoon animated horror stuff. There's not really, honestly, a lot of those out there. And finally, number 3, this is spooky series, but it also covers shows that are on network TV, shows that were in syndication, shows that were on HBO or any other cable channels, streaming shows like on Netflix and Peacock and stuff like that. So it covers everything, and also limited series, meaning like a Midnight Mass or a Haunting of Hill House, Wolf Pack sort of thing, which only lasted sort of one season or was only supposed to be like one season, is in this list also. So it's just a matter of just stuff that I know series tends to mean multiple seasons of a show, but in some cases it's a brand new show. The second season hasn't come out yet, or because I am so enamored with it, a multiple episode show to me is considered a series. And then there's one on here, which you can probably figure out by my hint, that has not even finished their run yet. Will be next week. And we got to get caught up on it. That's the point. Anyway, you can probably figure out what that is. So here we go. And off we go. I also always do honorable mention. This honorable mention is a little out there because one of the shows isn't really, I have 2 of them. One of the shows is not really spooky, but it has a connection to spookiness. And the other is just wasn't as big as another thing. My honorable mentions are Ghost Writer and Are You Afraid of the Dark? First off, Ghost Writer was a PBS show about a ghost that helped children write stuff. And I think I watched it when it came out like in the 90s. I thought it was an interesting little thing. and I think it's a ghost that enters like a typewriter, and they have a conversation with it. They solve either crimes or something like that. But I thought that was an interesting premise with a ghost actually helping them solve crimes and stuff like that. I thought that was kind of cool. And Are You Afraid of the Dark was Nickelodeon's horror anthology, but it couldn't go as far as a Goosebumps, so it was kind of the, a middle school, well, Goosebumps middle school, like an elementary school, I should say, elementary school, like horror anthology. So there was scary stuff, but nothing outlandishly scary. Oh, by the way, you like my new haircut? I just got it, so there you go. Nope. So sorry, wasn't expecting that phone call. Don't even know who it is. So they're honorable mention just because with Ghost Rider, it's a kid show just about a ghost that helps them write things and solve crimes and stuff like that. It's kind of the ghost can go around, find something, and then come back to the typewriter and then write out what they found and stuff like that. And Are You Afraid of the Dark, as I said, it's a good anthology series for younger kids, but and can be scary for them, but it's not one of the more uber scary, spooky ones. Number 35 is probably a show you've never heard of before, but Sam Raimi was one of the producers of it, and it actually got a really good critical acclaim. And it's American Gothic. And let me see if I can. I can see him in my head. Lucas Black was the lead character in it, and my favorite line is, "There's someone at the door." Just the way he talks like that. But American Gothic was a great horror show that lasted one season, 1995 actually, on CBS. It was created by Sean Cassidy. Yes, the Sean Cassidy. So basically, it starred, where's the recurring cast? Oh, sorry, main characters. Gary Cole was the main character. He played Lucas Buck. Lucas Black played Caleb Temple. Paige Turco is in it. Brenda Baki, Sarah Paulson, Jake Weber, and Nick Searcy. Recurring cast had Chris Fennell, Linda Clark, Michael Burgess, Evan Rachel Wood. But just sort of a Southern Gothic, just a horror aspect that just a little bit darker than you were expecting. Sheriff Buck is a murderous rapist whose power base is backed by apparent supernatural powers, which he generally uses to manipulate people to fulfill their potential and makes life-changing choices, usually for evil. So he's the local sheriff. He's also the bad guy. And wants to raise the young kid who is the only, and turn him into evil because he knows the kid's power, but the kid knows that he's not evil, and tries to fight back against him. It was ahead of its time, 1995, ahead of the time, didn't do very well, but it was a good cast, had some good horrific stuff in it. As I said, nothing too generally crazy spooky, but there was some interesting Gothic aspects to it, hence the name American Gothic, and worth a look if you can find. I don't even know where, if it is anywhere streaming, whatever. Number 34 is from HBO. It's Carnival. And this pissed me off. This is one show that my wife and I watched together before we had kids. Lasted 2 seasons, and here's the thing about it. It should have lasted 3 seasons. The storyline was set up for 3 seasons, and they only got 2 because the ratings sort of went into the toilet for HBO show, despite that they really shouldn't have. But again, I need to get, because a great cast in this as well. It is a very Twin Peaks-esque feel to it. It's 2003. Just kind of a weird sort of story. It takes place during like the 1930s, during the Great Depression, and it follows a circus troupe that goes around towns, and strange things start happening to it. Nick Stahl, Clancy Brown are the main characters. Who's the female lead? There's the cast. All right, so let's see what else we have here. Michael J. Anderson, who was the little man from Twin Peaks, was in it also. Tim DeKay, Patrick Boshu, Deborah Christopherson, Clea Duvall, Diane Salinger, John Fleck, Toby Huss, Carla Gallo, John Savage, Linda Hunt, but Clancy Brown was perfect. Amy Madigan was in it as well, played an evil role too. John Carroll Lynch was in it too. But it was just, it was a very well, from a production design standpoint, it was a very interesting setup. It was a interestingly shot with sort of a almost like a black and white or faded out tan sort of filter to it, which sort of gave it that sort of old parchment paper look, even though it was technically color and the characters were wearing mostly, grays and browns and blacks and stuff like that. So it didn't really pop on the show that much, but it was, a soap opera. You had people who had, Adrienne Barbeau had a role in that, from what I recall also. Like the older lady who seduced Nick Stahl's character. And just about a religious fanatic who he and his sister have a closer than usual relationship, but he's a religious fanatic, but he's got connections to the evil. And Nick Stahl plays a drifter who runs who runs with the circus group, who seems to be like a darker souled person, but it's actually the light. So it's kind of a good versus bad, and they kind of dream about each other and know each other. The priest and Nick Stahl, they dream about each other, and it's sort of a little bit of the stand in there as well. The way the depression is, everything seems to be coming around, that everything is coming down on this group. And it was set in the 1930s. I mean, and there's a lot of sexual provocative stuff, which in one episode drove the crowd that went to it a little crazy. So they tarred and feathered somebody. If you've ever seen somebody get tarred and feathered, it's not a fun thing at all. And just interesting characters. You learn some background characters. There was mystical stuff involved with it. A very Twin Peaks thing. I want to watch it again because it's such an interesting film or series, and the fact that it didn't survive and ended on a cliffhanger. And it was supposed to go 3 seasons. They had a storyline. The first season was the beginning. The second season was the middle. The third season was the end. They had it all planned out. Everything was perfect. And then HBO said, fuck you guys, I'm not going to do that, which is a shame. It was also why this isn't higher up on the list, because it would have been nice to see what they could have done. But it's hard to describe without ruining it for you, but it is well worth it if you can dig it up somewhere. Maybe it's on Max, I don't know, but Carnival is what it's called, and it's outstanding. Number 33 is the original Munsters TV show. Again, not all of the spooky series on here are going to be like scary horror-esque ones. It's going to be related to aspects of horror and stuff like that. Whereas, the Munsters is a family of a Frankenstein, a vampire, a werewolf, and a normal girl, all sort of living together and dealing with the at the time, it came out in the 60s, kind of dealing with the racial relations, stuff like that, because they were kind of making a statement that monsters were being treated like black people were being treated in the 1960s, and all they wanted was to kind of, they weren't bad monsters, they were good monsters. They just wanted to have all the rights and be liked and stuff like that as everybody else does. So it was it wasn't overtly a social TV show, because it was a goofy, kids-oriented show, and the creatures weren't scary. They were just, we had a vampire and a werewolf and a Frankenstein all living together with a normal girl. And it was just the way people reacted to them and treated them is what made the show interesting. Now, it's not as good as the Addams Family. The Addams Family is just grotesque in a good way. So that's why Addams Family was a bit higher up on the list. But the Munsters is definitely, again, more of a family-oriented series. Addams Family had a little bit of a darker edge to it. while still being kind of a popular TV show of the time. But the Munsters was almost not the anti-Addams Family, but it was Frankenstein, the colorful green Frankenstein. When they colorized something, they colorized. I think it was in black and white before. So Fred Gwynne was the Frankenstein in that. So, but just excuse me. But just a fun little show that had monsters in it that were trying to live peacefully amongst humans, and it didn't quite work out right, which is a shame because they're the sweetest people in the world. And Rob Zombie tried to do something completely different. He tried to make a monsters film like that would be as popular as the Addams Family films, and didn't quite be successful, but it was interesting because Rob Zombie grew up and he loved the Munsters, so he wanted to give credit to them and homage them and make it be a nice family-oriented Rob Zombie movie we should never hear of. But the Munsters, number 33. Number 32 is Friday the 13th, the series, which a lot of you might not know about, but guess what? Unfortunately, it has nothing to do with Jason Voorhees and Crystal Lake. That series will not be out until next year. As I said, if it's any good, it might make the list once it comes out. But for now, this is the one. They named it this because of the popularity of the Friday the 13th franchise. And it's supposedly set in the same universe as the Jason Voorhees and stuff like that, but he never shows up in the series. And they never mention it, but it was a way to draw people to see it. It was on syndication, so it would be on at weird times of the day, like 2:00 in the afternoon on a Saturday or 11 o'clock on a Saturday night, whatever. It was probably later because it did push syndication, allows you to push the boundaries of certain things, and it did push the boundaries a little bit with violence and some sexuality, but nothing too overt. They still keep it as like a television thing, but it was still a very close second to an R-rated film sort of thing. The basic premise is a guy sold his soul to the devil, and in return, or it did so, but in order for fame and fortune, I guess, whatever, he said he would push cursed goods onto people through the devil. And then eventually the guy said he wasn't going to do it anymore, so the devil kills him and takes his soul. This antique shop that has all these cursed antiques in it, falls into the lap of his niece and nephew, who take it over, and they don't want anything to do with it either. So they just sell the antiques at like discount prices, not knowing it has these dark powers to it. And then they discover when another member of their family comes and says, "What did you do with them?" And it's like, no, they're cursed items. So now it's their job to go out and find these cursed items and get them back from the owners. Now, the owners end up having some sort of supernatural ability or whatever based upon whatever the antique is. And that's why I say, every episode they were going to focus on taking out another antique and having to deal with the people who have some sort of supernatural aspect power to them. Again, not scary and overtly really scary, but definitely a spooky series with the idea of a supernatural sort of powered antique and the devil, selling show the devil and stuff like that. So Friday the 13th, this series is number 32. Number 31, we have a show that lasts, I think, 2 seasons. Jamie Lee Curtis doing some Fox, I think it was on Fox television, called Scream Queens. And I think it was just about a house of like a boarding school for girls who had to deal with horrible, like slasher sort of creatures all the time and stuff like that. A pretty interesting show from what I recall. I think I caught a couple episodes, but I thought it was decent enough that it got at least a couple seasons, I think, out of it. I just don't know if there's any other big actors in it. Jamie Lee Curtis was the main draw for it. Yeah, 2 seasons. Oh, no, not that one. Hold on. I guess it's 2015 then, so it only lasted 1 season? Oh, no, first season. Emma Roberts, Leah Michelle, Glenn Powell. Glenn Powell. Okay. Abigail Breslin, Oliver Hudson, Billy Lord, Jamie Lee Curtis, Ariana Grande, Nick Jonas were in supporting roles. And renewed for a second. I knew it was renewed for a second season. And they added John Stamos, Taylor Lautner, Kirstie Alley as well. Yeah, 20-year-old murder mystery reignited with the reemergence of the serial killer dressed as the Red Devil mascot, who begins targeting sorority members. So that's basically the premise of it. So really good cast. Again, I think it was ahead of its time. Oh, Jerry O'Connell, yay, is in the second season also. Charisma Carpenter was in the first season as well. Chad Michael Murray, Alan Thicke, Julia Duffy, Patrick Schwarzenegger, Faith Prince, Jean Louisa Kelly, Stephen Culp, Cecily Strong, Sherry O'Terry. They got a lot. Amy Okuda, Brooke Shields. They got a lot of, popular actors that come in here. I want to say it was done by Ryan Murphy. Yep, it's created by Ryan Murphy. It sounds like a Ryan Murphy jam. So Scream Queens, as I recall, I saw, as I said, a couple episodes of it. Great cast, and again, sort of a slasher serial killer, Red Devil going around slaughtering sorority chicks, and the sorority trying to figure out what's going on and solve the mystery. Number 30 is Scream, the series. It's on MTV. And they used a different mask for it, but it was, again, sort of this meta horror series that had a similar idea with Scream Queens, except it was just more along the lines of just basically what if you expanded the Scream movies and the main characters that were involved with that into a series when you're dealing with the Scream killer going around and killing people. But it was a different type of mask. But again, it was a mystery sort of thing, like in Scream, how it is a mystery who the killer was. And you know, lots of red herrings, lots of clues dropped about who it was. And then they had the reveal. And then I think that one also lasted 2 seasons, also maybe 3. Again, not quite 100% sure. Let's see, Scream, the series. It'd be better if you Scream TV series. Also 2015. And it was created by Kevin. Oh, no, sorry, no, it wasn't. MTV, yep. All right, to get 3 seasons, okay. And they rebooted the 3rd season with new cast members, and I think they brought back the old mask. Will Fitzgerald is the only one I really recognize of all these people. Bella Thorne, Tom Everett Scott, Mary J. Blige. But yeah, so it was, 2015 came out the same year as Scream Queens. So you had kind of the 2 sort of similar stuff. It lasted 3 seasons. I said the first 2 had the same sort of cast and crew and had sort of a continuing storyline. The 3rd one, as I recall, as they just mentioned there, they rebooted the whole thing, changed up with new characters, and keep it fresh, I guess, because there's not much more you could do with the cast that you had, because a lot of them were dead already and you already knew who the killers were, that sort of thing. So Scream the series, again, fits the bill with as a not really a spin-off of Scream, but keeps the general idea of Scream and keeping sort of the meta sort of look at horror films from that generation, but in TV format as well. And as again, the mask just didn't look right to me. And I think in the 3rd one, they brought the original one back. But the mask in the first 2 seasons, sort of like this glass plastic sort of round face that just didn't look right to me. Number 29 is the first of 2 of the same name show, but they're completely different. That's why they have completely different aspects on the list. As I said, not all of these series I'm doing are going to be overtly horrific and violent. Some are just spooky for fun because of the premise, stuff like that, i.e. the monsters. This one is Sabrina the Teenage Witch, the original one with Melissa Joan Hart, based on the Archie Comics character. So again, it was a part of the TGI Friday lineup on ABC, 9 o'clock usually, and I love the show. It had a good run and had some great stories, including most of their Halloween episodes were a lot of fun. But the reason why it's on here is a spooky series is because it's about a family of witches, and they're talking cat Salem, who was played by both a real cat and a puppet. When Salem was just sort of running around in real life, they had a black cat, actual live black cat running around the set, and the voice of Salem might have talked while the cat was running away. But then most of the time when they were conversing with Salem, he was a puppet cat who it was fun to watch. And it was, as I said, it was a TGIF. It was for families. It's an Archie character. There's nothing horrific, but it was witches, and there were, they had crossovers with other supernatural beings and stuff like that. But it was a fun, non-threatening sort of family series. As I said, had really good Halloween episodes, had a lot of cliched sitcom sort of stories, had decent cast, and just it was just a lot of fun. And they, I really, really enjoyed it, and it exactly fit what the comic book character of Sabrina is, and you had it with this, and they did a really, really good job with the series, and I think they did a couple like spin-off movies or whatever with the characters, but it was a decent one. We'll talk about the other Sabrina a little later in the list. Number 28 was, for the first time ever, they decided, soap operas have been huge since the 1950s, 1960s. And they were called soap operas because their main sponsor for these TV shows that were on every day, Monday through Friday, were soap companies. Because at the time, women were stay-at-home moms who needed soap to do dishes, do laundry, stuff like that. So there was a soap sponsor that sponsored these soap operas, which were melodramas with huge cast of characters, and the melodramatic music and the high drama stories. Oh my God, I'm pregnant with my brother's husband's child, or something like that, or my brother's my sister's brother's cousin's baby or whatever. And then there were good guys and bad guys and characters that played both sides. And you have like All My Children's, the General Hospital, and Days of Our Lives, and stuff like that. And as I said, there's thousands of episodes of these because they were Monday through Friday shows, all about an hour long, and long storylines. There are characters that have been married maybe like 6 or 7 times to different people and broke up and stuff like that. People who got injured were in the hospital, people having all these babies, and it's just, so it was just, soap operas are just a fun melodrama that you come home from school and you just start watching. My sister loved watching General Hospital right in the mid 80s when it was a huge hit. And I caught a few episodes as well. And, just crazy sort of storylines. And as I said, melodrama where everything was all, and just not great acting and stuff like that. But it was, as I said, 5 episodes a week. So for 365 days, you just cut out the weekends. That's how many episodes you got. And people get pissed when like big events like sporting events or breaking news breaks in and breaks up their soap operas, like they get delayed. I think there's still a few soap operas out there. But one of them that came and went pretty quickly, it didn't have the longevity of like a General Hospital or a Days of Our Lives, something like that, was my number 28, Dark Shadows. And it was at the time, it's like, soap operas were getting a little, you could pretty much figure out what was going on, and they needed to mix it up a little bit to make your soap opera different than other soap operas. So in this case, what they did is they made it be a soap opera, set in a supernatural-esque sort of world where the main character is a vampire. And you had to, and then the storylines come from the fact that he is the vampire and does all the vampire stuff, sucks blood, turns into bats and mist, seduces women. And then you have all the other people who come in and out of the story. Barnabas Collins is the name of the character. I've been trying to think of it in my head while I'm talking about it. And you have all his family members coming in and trying to be okay with the fact that he's a vampire and him trying to control his urges. But it also became a soap opera that they had other characters, stuff like that were around in the same story as the vampire soap opera was, but might not have interacted with the vampires as much. So you could have your soap opera melodrama, but the main story always kind of focused on Barnabas Collins and his family and the vampire and the weird supernatural stuff that happened around them, but making it a supernatural soap opera, which has really never been done before. I think there was another soap opera that tried something similar, but not with it being the main thing. There was the toy that becomes a real boy, and like a strange mist possesses people, something like that, or someone was possessed. I forget the name of that soap opera, but they tried to change up a little bit. But because that's not what soap operas really were, and they had more of a supernatural bent to the stories than your typical melodramatic soap operas, it didn't become as huge a soap opera as it maybe should have. Being unique, people who watch the soap operas, they expect a certain level of melodrama and a certain way of figuring out exactly what to expect from the show. And they didn't get it with Dark Shadows. It still has one of the most iconic themes. And I think I might be able to play it a little bit without getting copyrighted on it. It's one of my favorite themes that is part of my Halloween music. Halloween Night Sounds. There it is. Yeah, I got to get through the stupid commercials. So you probably heard that. Don't know what it was, but that's Dark Shadows theme. And it was so popular, or not fully popular, but it did have some popularity and some iconic value to it. Tim Burton made a movie version of it that wasn't quite great. Not one of his best pictures, but definitely did fit the whole Tim Burton-esque sort of quality of things that you expect from him. So Dark Shadows, the soap opera, again, was a soap opera that did deal with supernatural stuff as well as some of the regular melodrama, is number 28. Number 27 is The Addams Family. I talked about that back with the Munsters. They were the creepy, kooky, altogether ooky family. You could say Morticia might be a witch. You could say that for the most part. But there's no other real supernatural aspect to it. They live in a castle. They're bizarre people. Gomez is this Spanish, suave sort of guy that has the ability to just do crazy things and really good at fencing and stuff like that. John Astin and Raul Julia perfectly encapsulated who Gomez was, and then Oscar Isaac did the voice of him in the animated one. So you got some really good casting in that as well. And then Morticia is his wife that he absolutely adores, and Gomez and Morticia is should be couple goals. They're absolutely into each other. In a very sometimes unhealthy manner, how into each other they are. Angelica Houston and Raul Julia had absolutely perfect chemistry together in the Addams Family movies. I forget who played the actress in the John Astin Addams Family version, but he and Morticia were just as comfortable together as they were in the movie. And it's just they live in a castle. They just got weird, creatures, and they always are trying to kill each other or hurt each other, but it's all done out of love. You have Wednesday and Pugsley are the kids, and they're not monsters like in the Munsters, but they do have sort of a just kind of a goth quality to them. And they are probably the most healthy family you've ever seen when you watch the actual Addams Family movies and the TV show. So it's spooky just because their whole life is they're like living. They live like in Halloween. It's like they are residents of Halloween Town. Because their whole lives revolve around dark and evil and horrific stuff, but they are the kindest, sweetest people in the whole entire world. And you can count on them to do things, and it's just great. The TV show, as I said, was a good series, a little bit better than the Munsters, in my opinion. And then, of course, the movies, spinoffs have been just as good. So Addams Family is number 27. Jumping on to that, number 26 is Wednesday. Tim Burton's take on the Addams Family, kind of. Instead, he focuses on Wednesday, played by Jenna Ortega, who goes to a boarding school for her school. That the boarding school has, similar people with her sort of outlook on things. There's werewolves and vampires and all kinds of other supernatural-esque beings on the campus, and because of their supernatural-esque sort of abilities and stuff like that, this is the best place for them to go to school without being considered outsiders and stuff like that, because they're amongst people of their own. But there's still something off with the school that Wednesday goes to, and she eventually discovers there's some sort of weird murder spree going on, and she decides to jump in and solve it because she has nothing better to do. And she's also dealing with her really happy-go-lucky, sweet as all heck werewolf roommate, played by Emma Myers. And the two of them have created this great bond that is wonderful to see. Season 1 is on Netflix, came out, I think, last year or 2 years ago, something like that. And we binged all of them, and a fantastic cast. You get to see every member of the Addams Family, even though they are barely in it. They make appearances here and there. It's not an Addams Family show. It's a Wednesday show, but you do see Gomez and Morticia and Uncle Fester and Pugsley, and you see all of them, and they're all well cast as well. And I hope we get to see a little bit more of them in the future, because what I always heard was that Tim Burton wanted to do Wednesday first to just sort of test the waters for his version of the Addams Family, because he wrote practically every episode and he directed about half of them. Same thing with the season 2 that's going to be out next year. And he wanted to do his version of the Addams Family. But before he did that, he wanted to gauge popularity of it, so he decided to focus on Wednesday and have her interact with members of her family, instead of it just being the Addams Family, not being overburdened by having all these characters in it. Just focus on Wednesday, but periodic episodes they would bring in the members of the family and see what stuck. And my thought was that after the first season, if it went really well, it was supposed to spin off into a new Addams Family series, which would focus on the whole family and not just Wednesday, with Tim Burton doing all the stuff with that one. Still could happen, but the fact that Wednesday was renewed for a second season, and they've been working on that, so we'll see if that's putting off his plans to do an actual Addams Family series with this cast, or if that was never the case and he always wanted to do with Wednesday. But regardless, Wednesday is absolutely the perfect updated version of the Addams Family TV show. Again, even though it's just focusing on Wednesday, she has her own friend unit and her own cast of characters that are entertaining to watch. And it is a fun series. If you have not watched it yet, it's only like, 6-8 episodes, something like that. It's on Netflix. If you have Netflix, particularly now, it's spooky season, 5 days before Halloween, binge it, watch some episodes, and you might enjoy it, actually. Second season and coming next year, so that's really good. Number 25 is the granddaddy of the X-Files, and that was brought up by Chris Carter, the creator of the X-Files. He said this show could not have existed without this one. Number 25 is Kolchak the Night Stalker. Now, on just hearing the title, you think, oh, wow, it's just about like some sort of serial killer sort of guy that's doing things. No. Kolchak the Night Stalker is actually a newspaper reporter played by, the dad from, it's killing me, the dad from Christmas Story. Trying to think of his name. It'll come to me before I get to it probably, but Kolchak. 1974 series, so it's 40 years old, or 50 years old, excuse me. Darren McGavin, yep. And basically, he's a newspaper reporter who is the only one that goes and investigates people who have had eyewitness accounts of like ghosts and werewolves and vampires and stuff like that. And he's going in to try to get the story, the scoop about it to see if it's real or not. And he gets himself involved in the storylines with the people who are saying they're being, stalked by vampires or werewolves, stuff like that. So he gets involved with that. And as Chris Carter said before, he said it many times, without Kolchak, you don't have the X-Files. It was his whole idea for the X-Files was to have a investigation into supernatural stuff in a similar vein to Kolchak. And that's what they did. Plus, to give credit to Darren McGavin, they brought him into Millennium, which was Chris Carter's other show, and made him be the father of Lance Henriksen's character, Frank Black. And they might have even brought Darren McGavin into an episode or two of the X-Files as well before he passed away. But it's a 50-year-old show. As I said, just it's a fun sort of procedural show. I think ABC was the show that showed it. It spun off comic books and other stuff and novels, stuff like that. And even there was an attempt at a reboot, I guess, early 2000s that didn't really take or anything like that. But it is, the first one about someone investigating supernatural activity in a job that was, not just some psychopathic dude like, I want to go after these. It was a newspaper reporter trying to find the truth behind the creature things and having to deal with them. So Kolchak the Night Stalker is number 25. As I said, spooky series doesn't automatically mean it's horrific and horrible and violent, all that stuff. Kolchak is scary for 1974 basics, but not overtly scary since it was a network show and they wanted families to watch it. And it was, very well done. Darren McGavin perfectly cast in it. And that's before Christmas Story. That was the one thing that he was most remembered for. Was his character of Kolchak. It's just a cool name too, Kolchak the Night Stalker. Number 24 is one of my favorite shows. It debuted on NBC. It was like 7 o'clock on a Sunday night on NBC, half-hour long show. Was always getting preempted by football, so it didn't really find the ratings it should have because it is such a good show. And then found its way in the syndication or another channel or something like that and did a couple more episodes, but again, didn't do as expected, and then they end up canceling it. Omri Katz is the main character in it, and it's such a great idea. Erie, Indiana is about a kid who's a paper boy, and he discovers just weird things happening in his neighborhood. He discovers there's a boy that never ages. We learned that, and they're all half-hour long episodes. And he learns an episode when he tries to investigate that the kid lives in like a hyperbolic chamber. So you have that. It also has some of the most meta stuff that you ever expected, also, or great ideas for shows you never expected. But Erie, Indiana supposedly has all these like weird, bizarre supernatural things happening, Bigfoot sightings and lake monsters and weird twins and weird people who don't age and vampires, stuff like that. But it also has some interesting story ideas. One of my favorites that I always remember is they did an episode about what happens to the hour that you lose when you turn your clocks ahead an hour, and he gets stuck in that lost hour. And it's really a cool idea. They never really talked about too much. The character also has a bully who's almost like a Tom Felton sort of Slytherin Draco Malfoy type, who was always trying to stick it to the main character, but always failed in the end. But the final episode they ever did was the most meta thing you've ever seen, where the main character wakes up and he is on a set of a TV show called Erie, Indiana. And everybody he works with is his family. So, but they're all actors. So he's got a mother and a father, and he's got his friends, and he's got enemies, stuff like that. And so they're the same characters, but in this reality where he wakes up, they are the actors who portray the roles, and he is Omri Katz, is who he is. He's not this character, even though he truly believes he's still that character. It's hard to explain, but that's kind of like the sort of the meta stuff that you expect. And then like the whole thing also about is what happens in the dryer where you lose something, and they end up discovering like the lost civilization where all the lost stuff, your lost socks and stuff like that, goes to this. So it's a lot of high concept ideas for a half-hour NBC family show, and it's so cool. And it's a shame that it didn't last longer, because it was a good story and they had some really creative and interesting story ideas. And so, it's in there in the title itself, Erie, Indiana, is it's a play on words, because the town is also called Erie. And unfortunately, it's not Erie, New York, it's Erie, Indiana. And it's such a great show, and is one of the first real meta sort of shows out there. Again, sort of ahead of its time, with some really great story ideas that not only people. And actually, to be honest, I think John Astin might have popped up in an episode or two of Erie, Indiana. Erie, Indiana. Yep, Mr. Radford. Yep, John Astin. Yep. Harry Goes from Twin Peaks. I didn't know that. Henry Gibson. But yeah, just just great stories and just interesting takes on certain things. Again, sort of one of the first ever meta sort of shows, and I don't think it gets talked about enough. I think it's totally underrated. And I remember watching every episode. I think I might throw most of them out, but I used to videotape shows all the time. I had a bunch of those videotaped as well. Number 23 is the MTV, I think, spinoff of Teen Wolf called Teen Wolf. And then because it was so popular, they decided to do a spinoff of that called The Wolf Pack that starred Sarah Michelle Gellar, that was on Peacock, or Paramount, one of those two. They only lasted a season and they canceled it. But I mentioned Wolf Pack obviously because Sarah Michelle Gellar's in it. But Teen Wolf is a great 80s comedy with Michael J. Fox, and it's a comedy about a kid discovers he's a werewolf. And they basically did a Buffy the Vampire Slayer sort of thing, like the original Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie, much like the Teen Wolf movie is kind of a goofy sort of movie, but then the TV show is a bit darker and more horror oriented, and so is Teen Wolf. The characters are unrecognizable despite the fact that they have the same names as the characters in the Michael J. Fox one, but that's kind of what makes it a great show, just like how Buffy the TV show is better than the movie, but the movie is entertaining to watch, as is Buffy. Same thing here. Teen Wolf is the funnier movie. But the Teen Wolf show is good to have a different perspective on it. And then to have a spinoff because your show is so popular and have one of the greatest actresses of her time, Sarah Michelle Gellar, be in it is a huge deal, despite the fact that it didn't succeed. But again, it's a little bit more of a supernatural aspect to it, a little bit more violent, a little bit more horror oriented, and the characters are a lot different than they were in the movie. Number 22 is the first of our limited series, and I think the first that Mike Flanagan's involved with, who is like the new sort of go-to guy to do this. His last Netflix series, The Fall of the House of Usher, his limited series kind of adaptation of the Edgar Allan Poe story with a cast that of actors and actresses he always works with over and over again. And a good typical like 6 to 8 to 9 episode series that's, has a good complete middle, a good beginning, middle, and end. Very well shot, very well acted, interesting to look at. And there hasn't really been a decent Edgar Allan Poe adaptation of anything since the 1960s Hammer films. And we haven't had a really good one in a while. And Fall of the House of the Usher is kind of an adaptation, but does kind of its own little thing. And actually, I think it handles, it draws from a bunch of other Edgar Allan Poe stories as well, if I recall, to cover stuff. But again, kind of a creepy, visually very nice, great designs. As I said, very creepy, kind of spooky-ish sort of series, and a good adaptation of an Edgar Allan Poe storyline, while not being an absolute adaptation of it and not being beholden to it, but you get the general gist of what the story is based on the Edgar Allan Poe story. This sort of follows it a little bit. As I said, I think it has some of the other Edgar Allan Poe attributes to it as well, which is another good thing because it is a celebration of everything Edgar Allan Poe, and it's kind of a big thing here in Baltimore because he's buried here. Our Ravens team is named after him, which is why I'm pissed that the NFL fucked us by not playing the Ravens and Bengals on Thursday night football next Thursday, which is Halloween. I think it would have been perfect to have Baltimore host the Halloween game with their rivals, the Cincinnati Bengals, in the town where Edgar Allan Poe is buried, and the creepy Ravens stuff like that. And the Ravens could have wore their all black uniforms, and Cincinnati could wear their all orange ones. So you have the orange and black colors, and just Halloween in Baltimore with the Ravens would have been a brilliant idea, but no, they fucked it up and they got some other shitty Thursday night game. And to prove how close it came, the next Thursday game after it on the 7th of November is the Ravens Bengals in Baltimore. If they would have just moved it back a week, it would have been so much better, but they didn't. But Fall of the House of Usher is definitely worth your watch. I binged Mike Flanagan stuff before a Friday into a Saturday. Not the greatest idea because I watched the majority of them on Friday. Didn't go to bed till like 3 a.m. And then the minute I got up at like 9 a.m., I put in the last 2 or something like that to watch it. But there you go. Number 21 is our first reality show. There's only 2 on here. But this century has been the century of reality show. The very first kind of, there have been sort of similar ones, but the first kind of real reality show came out in 2000 was Survivor. And after that, in popularity of that, you had American Idol and then all the other stuff. And then the one that fucked us in the political arena, which I'm not going to talk about. So you have all these hugely popular reality shows, and it became its own genre this century. And so you had to keep coming up with ideas. You've got Dirty Jobs, you've got House Hunters, you've got Arctic fish people who go fishing in the Arctic, and the ice road truckers who drive across lakes and stuff like that are frozen over on their trip, and with their heavy baggage, and they're slipping and they could fall, and if they do, it's all just build up and stuff like that. And so reality show just exploded this century. And so they're always trying to find, it's a huge popular genre. So you've got all things covered. And then you've got to think of something original and different than every other sort of reality show. So why don't you do something in the supernatural? And these were the first people to do it. Ghost Hunters is number 21. That was on Sci-Fi Channel, and it follows a group of ghost hunters set in Warwick, Rhode Island, who are called in to investigate haunted locations. Could be houses, could be businesses, schools, jails, whatever, called in by someone and they use their most recent up-to-date scientific stuff to try to prove the existence of ghosts. So they go in, they prep everything in the daytime, and then at night they set up their cameras. They then they film. The film crew comes in and films them investigating these haunted places. They use EVPs, tape recorders, to try to communicate with the spirits, to try to get their voices recorded on tape. They use the heat glances to see if they can find shadow creatures or human forms watching you that are colder than everything else. They use all kinds of scientific equipment to try to prove and see how big the haunting is and like that. So they just wander around in groups and you follow them around, and they build up suspense with creepy music. And then some things happen, like they're walking through here and they hear like a footsteps, or they hear like rocks tumbling or whatever, and they automatically think that it's spirits and stuff like that. But they go all over the country. They've been to Maryland a few times and investigate haunted houses. There was one I remember, haunted locations, that pissed off the guys who run Ghost Hunters more than anything. It was a restaurant in California which fakes being haunted. But I guess they called in the Ghost Hunters because they either wanted to prove that, because that Ghost Hunters are stupid or gullible or whatever, as regular people are. And the Ghost Hunters discovered that they do have a specific setup to make it look like it's haunted, even though it isn't. And they went off on the owners of it. It was so great to see that. And what they do is, so they gather the evidence, they investigate it, and they go back and they talk to people who hired them to say, this is what we found, this is what we didn't find, stuff like that. And some of them, they don't find anything or barely anything, so it makes the shows kind of boring. But then sometimes they find some really cool stuff. But they use more scientific stuff, and they do more of a scientific exploration of it. And they did find some good proof up at Gettysburg, which to me, I believe, is truly one of the most haunted places in the world. They also found some good evidence with that hotel in Colorado, which is what The Shining was based on. So they went to that as well. And so they're still around, but the show is not. And that's why Ghost Hunters is 21. A reality show where you got to know the cast members and have some of their own issues. And then as they go and investigate these haunted locations at night to try to get proof. And a lot of it's just sort of, you can make interpretations of it, and it can be kind of boring when they don't find anything. There's like very null and void stuff. So that's them. Number 20 is the Buffy the Vampire spinoff Angel, focusing on the vampire with the soul, Angel, played by David Boreanaz. They shifted over Charisma Carpenter's character as well. And eventually Alexis Denisov's character, Wesley, also shifts his way over there. And for the first couple seasons, they had a close interaction with Buffy, but then they sort of went off on their own. And then Buffy ended a year before Angel did. Angel's first 2 seasons are decent. 3 and 4 are mediocre to me, and number 5 is probably one of the best seasons of television ever, where they changed the whole status quo of the show and made it more interesting. But it is definitely, it's got the Buffy the Vampire Slayer personality since Joss Whedon was involved with it, as was David Greenwalt, who was also producer on Buffy for the longest time too. And because it is a spinoff, they try to keep the connection between the two shows, but this gave them an opportunity to do a little bit darker stories, more grown-up stories, because the characters are more grown up in this than they are in Buffy, and you really can only do so much with college-age kids, whereas here you've got a vampire that lives forever, an older gentleman who's like a watcher, and Charisma Carpenter's character, who is older beyond her age. She must be an actress, and they're out in California, and they have run-ins with all kinds of demonic stuff and supernatural creatures, and there's a world that, in order to get information, he talks to all these supernatural creatures, stuff like that. And as I said, season 5 is one of the best seasons of all time of any TV series, so well worth that. But Angel is number 20. Number 19, it was during this period in the 1990s and early 2000s where you had Buffy, you had Angel, you had Roswell, and you had number 19, Charmed, all on at the same time. Charmed is Alyssa Milano, Shannon Doherty, and I always forget the 3-name woman. As sisters who discovered they are witches, and Holly Marie Combs. And discover they're witches, and they all have a different power. And so they start to, because they are now fully aware of their powers, they start noticing more of the supernatural craziness that is occurring in their neighborhood in San Francisco and in San Francisco in general. And we follow them, and they all have regular jobs, and then how the magic powers of being the witches, how that affects their jobs. You see their relationships with people, and just a really good sort of connection to the Buffy, Angel, Roswell sort of stuff that the WB/CW was going for back in the late 1990s and early 2000s, because that's what people, that was popular, what people were going after. So it lasted a good amount of seasons. They had a spinoff series. It didn't last quite as long, spinoff, but a reboot series. It didn't last as long, but good storylines, good cast. There was the behind the scenes stuff between Shannon Doherty and Alyssa Milano that resulted in Shannon Doherty leaving the show after the 3rd season, I think. And they had to bring in Rose McGowan to play out the remaining seasons. And then Kaylee Kuko came in for the final season. And but it was just, again, it was witches, part of the whole CW sort of, or the WB, I should say. I think it was more WB sort of teen horror, sci-fi sort of vibe they were throwing out there, and it worked. It's a pretty decent show, and that's number 19. Number 18 is a sci-fi show that I've been doing my show Dylan Knows for 11 years, and before that, a couple years before that, I was in a group called the Snark Alex that we started by making fun of the B movies on the Sci-Fi Channel. And then we became friends, and then we got our own radio show that we did, and we talked about a lot of stuff we're talking about now, stuff like that. But one of the things we did was we also talked about Z Nation, which is number 18 on the list here. And the premise behind Z Nation is, what if the guys behind Sharknado, which everybody knows how crazy that is, did a zombie show? And that's exactly what happened. And you get crazy zombie action. And it lasted a good 3 to 4 seasons. So we would watch a season and we would have discussions about it. We would talk about the show. We would tweet about it. And made it, one of the more popular shows out there. And it was right there, right when the zombie apocalypse blew up with the popularity of all the zombie stuff. Our Snark Out group was very connected to zombies and horror B movies and stuff like that. So it made sense with that. It came out around the same time as Walking Dead. So good sort of companion to Walking Dead, because they were two completely different zombie shows, which made it okay for both of them to be around. Z Nation was more of a kind of a tongue-in-cheek, bizarre actiony sort of thing, with crazy characters, crazy scenarios, stuff that you would never see on The Walking Dead. And The Walking Dead was the one that sort of played it more professional and more realistic, and is based on a comic book. So they had a certain amount of leeway they could only have, but the majority of it was just sort of like, we can only do so much because we got to stay within the parameters of the show's mythology as well. But Z Nation was a good companion to it if you wanted to take on two different type of zombie apocalypses, and just a fun show. Honestly, it was a lot more fun than The Walking Dead, to be honest. I think Z Nation might actually be a much more entertaining show to watch than The Walking Dead is. And it's a shame that Walking Dead got 10 seasons, where Z Nation, I think, only got 3 or 4. So, because sci-fi is stingy like that. But definitely well worth the chance if you haven't seen it yet. Very decent. Great. As I said, great cast. And again, just to get the general idea what the show's about, it's what if the creators of Sharknado did a zombie show. And so you get all the ludicrous and all the crazy stuff that happened, but you also get kind of a decent story behind the whole thing too. Number 17 is the other Sabrina, the Teenage Witch show. This one was a more darker oriented Netflix one. It's darker because Sabrina is still the same Archie character, but because Archie's been pretty much doing the same exact thing for 50 plus years in their comics, it's always about, Betty and Veronica and who Archie is going to pick. And actually probably 1950s more, because it's more about soda shops and just kid comics about high school kids. That's really what it was about. So it was good kids in high school. There's not a lot of drugs and sex and stuff like that. It's just, just a goofy guy trying to decide between two of the hottest girls in school who both like him. His best friend Jughead is basically is your typical stoner, but you couldn't do stoner in this. So he just ate a lot of food. He was like Wimpy from Popeye. So it's a family-oriented series. And the Melissa Joan Hart series on ABC, that was way back number 29, was the best epitome of that, and was a really good adaptation of that Archie comics version of Sabrina. This version, however, is somewhere, again, around the time of the zombie apocalypse stuff happened around the mid-2000s. Archie got a new creative editor-in-chief who decided he wanted to expand Archie into doing more than just their typical Archie stuff, since the sales are still decent, but they could be so much better. So they created a Archie comic called, I just had it in my head, like Archie Apocalypse or something like that. And it was a more adult version, grown-up version of the Archie comics set during the zombie apocalypse. And it was a much darker sort of storyline. The characters are a little bit darker than you expect from the typical Archie stuff. They're the same ones: Betty, Veronica, Jughead, Archie. Afterlife with Archie or something like that is what it was. It was the name of it, something like that. And there was a zombie apocalypse, and they're like the only ones that survived it. And it's a more, as I said, more of a dark horror take on it. And it became hugely popular because the zombie apocalypse stuff was going on in the mid-2000s, and it was a completely different take on Archie, and had a great artist and writer on it. Francisco Villanueva, who was fantastic, did the artwork for it, and Robert Aguirre Sansa, who was the new creator for Archie, came up with the story idea. And then they saw how popular it was by turning Archie from this frothy 1950s sitcom-y sort of comic book into a true straight-up horror one, that they decided to expand that with other characters. And the most obvious choice was Sabrina. She was a witch already, so why don't you expand her into more of a dark horror territory and have her actually connected with Cthulhu, instead of like typical other witchcraft stuff like that. So they made comics with Sabrina, and then Netflix saw the comics. They were pretty popular, said, we kind of want to do a Sabrina show, but this darker version of it, not the bubblegum version of it that we got in the ABC. So they did, and they've made this darker version of Sabrina the Teenage Witch in Netflix. Has more of a horror vibe to it. And this in turn, because of the popularity of this, I think it lasted 2 or 3 seasons. Because of the popularity of this, it in turn also brought about a new Archie TV show on like the CW or WB, which was more of a grown-up Twin Peaks sort of version of it. So again, keeping with changing Archie from being the goofy, frothy soda jerk, 1950s teenager to a more grown-up, horrific one, they decided to do that. So that's what you get with this Sabrina the Teenage Witch. It's a lot darker than the bubblegum, frothy, fun Melissa Joan Hart version of it. The funny thing is the women who played her aunts in the Sabrina TV show actually guest starred on an episode of the dark Netflix version of it. So kind of interesting as well. Sort of a little callback, throwback, whatever. So Sabrina Teenage Witch, the Netflix darker version is number 17, since it is scarier and more spooky than the ABC version. That's why it's where it is. Number 16 is Goosebumps. Why not do a series for middle school and early high school kids? That's a horror anthology sort of story based on the books by R.L. Stine that were hugely popular reads by middle school or stuff like that. Why not adapt some of these to television and make it into a TV show? And it works. Kids who grew up with that still remember the show fondly. The show is having sort of a revival on Netflix. Second season's coming out here soon of it. And again, it's a middle school, high school introduction to horror. It's got some crazy horror stories and some crazy supernatural creatures, stuff like that, but it still has the innocence of youth attached to it, and it's not the cynical horror films we're used to seeing now. But Goosebumps is always a good one, and it spun off its own movie series as well. And again, there's a new reboot. That's the first season's already out on Netflix. The second season is set to be debuting here soon, shortly. But Goosebumps, the original series, is a good one for being younger. As I said, I haven't watched it since I was younger. It actually came out after I was past the age it was focused on, but it was still kind of fun to take a look at because my kids got a little involved with it for a short period there. They read Goosebumps novels, as most kids did at that age, and watched some of the shows that we were able to find. Number 15 is Millennium. Again, has the second season is one of the absolute best television seasons of all time. Up there with which one did I just say it was? I can't remember. But it is one of the greatest series of all times. The second season was. The premise behind it was created by Chris Carter, who created the X-Files. So after the X-Files became popular, Fox wanted him another show from him. So he came with this idea for a character named Frank Black, who has like a semi-psychic ability, who actually can tell what killers are thinking and how things were done, and can kind of see them and can say this is what they did and try to find their victims, stuff like that. And they throw in this came out in the early or the late 1990s. So the millennium was coming up with a change. So there's a lot of that anxiety about the change over to 2000 that the show jumped on and stuff like that. And the first season was just really just creature of the week sort of stuff. Frank Black, played by Lance Henriksen, and his wife and daughter move to a small town, gorgeous house that he's been trying to get away from, this horrible job that he's had, that dealing with the worst minds in the world. But a buddy of his from when he worked at the old stuff requests his help on a case. So he decides to freelance and to make some extra money to help pay for some of the bills and stuff like that. And they have a young daughter, so got to pay for that stuff like that. So he does a freelance job where he does a job when he wants to at his prices and when he can like that. So they hire him to continue doing his job, trying to find these killers to use his psychic ability. Well, at the same time, they all have sort of connection. There's an underlying story about the upcoming Millennium and the Millennium Group, which is run by his buddy that called him in to investigate this crime, is trying to get him to become a part of the Millennium group. And we don't know much about them, and we find out more about them in the second and third seasons, that they're not quite on the up and up. But the first season, you don't really get that. Terry O'Quinn is great in the show as well, playing the guy, his buddy from the Millennium Group. It's just the second season, the first season was more just the killer of the week sort of show, where he would, be called in to investigate something, and then he would investigate it and solve it, and everything would be wrapped up at the end. And then they, like with X-Files, they did periodic little things where they connected the Millennium Group to some of the bad stuff, and talked about, stuff is going to change when the Millennium hits, and they need to be prepared for it, blah, 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 stuff like that. So they did do some mythology episodes, but a lot of the first season was more killer of the week sort of stuff. So, but that was really about it. It wasn't really as supernatural and as exciting. It was a lot of true crime and more about the horrificness of man than it was about supernatural stuff. But the second season, Chris Carter had to step away as showrunner and producer. This X-Files, he was dealing with the X-Files movie and a bunch of other shows as well, so he needed to focus more on that. So two of his guys who are writers on the X-Files and had been writing for Millennium also, James Wong and I forget who the other person is, convinced them to take over as the showrunners for Millennium in season 2, and they put themselves in charge of writing almost every episode. They got some freelance ones in there as well, but it gave them the opportunity to do what they've been trying to do, which is focus on some of the supernatural aspect of the Millennium Group and the upcoming Millennium issue that they were talking about, that the world was going to end sort of on Millennium Day, and so on and so forth, trying to figure that out. And they were built, and they knew what they were doing, building the second season to how it ended, because they didn't think the show was going to get picked up for a third season. So they figured they would be able to wrap up their storyline in the second season. So the Millennium Group becomes almost full on evil now. So his buddy Terry, played by Terry O'Quinn, now becomes sort of his enemy. But they were like one of the main roles in the first season. They take sort of a back seat in the second season as we focus more on the beliefs of the Millennium and the supernatural stuff. Highlights include the Halloween episode where Frank takes on the devil, the Christmas episode where angels are being spotted around everywhere. Frankie's spotting angels everywhere and is trying to figure out the meaning of what that is about. The one about where Frank gets called in to try to find a boy lost in the woods, and a supernatural event helps him find him. They do an episode dealing with the Zodiac killer called the Mikado, which is a great episode. And then, as X-Files did, there were a couple of silly kind of episodes that X-Files did really well. They did a couple of silly episodes of Millennium, which really played really, really well. And then they had to lead up to, because it was late 90s, it was like the Millennium was going to come. So they had to lead up to the turnover to the 21st century. So like the final 3 to 5 episodes, the final 3 to 5 episodes focused on the Millennium coming, and had to build up to a certain point that there was going to be a outbreak of a disease that was going to kill like 99% of the population, and Frank had to try to stop it. And then it ended, not really a cliffhanger, kind of a cliffhanger. but it ended where they wanted it to because they thought it was only going to last. It wasn't going to get renewed. So Fox decided, hey, we're going to fuck around with you. And we're going to renew it for a third season. So they had wrapped up everything, so they had to come up with something else. So they gave him a new partner, gave him a new location, and then threw off what had happened in the finale. It's just, not really, didn't happen. Sort of fanatic thing contained in one area, didn't happen all over the world, but there's going to be something else now also. The Millennium Group barely pops up in this season, and it just focuses more on the mental patients and the killers, and him and his partner share more his new partner share more storylines. We learn more about his new partner's life and stuff like that. So third season kind of goes downhill for me. First season was brilliant. The second season is one of the best ever made. Third season has some good episodes and ideas, but a lot of it is just sort of like kind of a cop out. They shouldn't have done a third season on that. But Millennium is decent. Good Mark Snow music, great Lance Henriksen acting in it, and a very Chris Carter X-Files appearance. And plus, to wrap things up, he appears in an episode of the X-Files. Lance Henriksen's Frank Black does. To kind of wrap up loose ends that fans were trying to figure out. So they did an episode of X-Files to wrap up Millennium. Number 14 is the second reality show on this list, the Ghost Adventures, which is the more of the Ghost Bro sort of guys. Three, big guys, big, loud, obnoxious sort of guys who use scientific equipment, stuff like that, but they also tend to be a little bit more hostile to try to, and the reason why they're doing that is to try to get better proof, because the ghost hunters, they did things kind of passively and scientifically, asking quiet questions, but they didn't really confront anything or whatever. So their stuff really wasn't as good as it could be. The Ghost Adventures crew really ups the ante with a bunch of different things that they do, leaving one of them alone in an area that's one of the most haunted spots, and then they would investigate something else and see how he would react, see how they would react to something like that. They got a bit more angry and vicious at stuff, more accusatory to try to draw things out, and they got better. And to be fair, they did get better proof than the Ghost Hunters did. Still, one of my all-time favorites is their Gettysburg episode also, where they cover 3 different Gettysburg areas and crazy stuff happens in all of them. But the best one is they went during the beginning of the Gettysburg campaign. It was like the 150th anniversary or 250th anniversary or whatever of it. And they went during that, it was July 1st, 2nd, 3rd. So they were actually up there during that time when the war actually happened, when the spirit world would probably be a bit more active since they all died there. And on midnight of the first night of the battle, they were out and they shot this gun, like it sounded like the beginning of the Civil War. And they had this like weird camera that had panned down there, and they didn't see anything right away. So when they went back to do the editing, they saw that after they shot the gun, in the bottom there is a soldier that crosses at midnight, which is one of the coolest Want Scenes episodes ever. There's another one, they were at a dam where they had some decent activity there as well. And some really good proof showed up there. There's some of the shadow people you've seen where you see their heads and they pop out, stuff like that. The first one they did was a movie for Sci-Fi, and it was at some old Western sort of places, and they went into this basement where they encountered floating stuff, which was really cool. And then they went to one of their first ones they ever did was this really haunted country music place where they got, again, I'm getting chills just thinking about some really, really good, evil sort of evidence, including a shadow figure dressed in look like Western attire who disappears sort of thing. I know Ghost Hunters got some good thing. They got a shot of like a heat signature crossing a hallway, and then they didn't see anybody, and there was nobody else in there, and the heat signature was gone once they entered the room where the ghost went into. So it wasn't like it could be a person. But Ghost Adventures was much more aggressive, more accusatory, more vicious, as it were. They still use kind of similar scientific equipment, but they try different tactics to try to, induce the supernatural stuff instead of letting it happen when it wanted to. They tried to induce it, and that's why it's much higher than Ghost Hunters, because it's more entertaining of a show, and they had better evidence, but the characters are much more annoying than they were in Ghost Hunters, and that's why it's higher, but not quite in the top 10. Number 13 is Being Human, based on a BBC show. They did an American version on Sci-Fi. My wife it was one of the shows that we watched together all the time, and my wife has another connection because she wrote reviews of it for a sci-fi website for the longest time. And it was a 4 or 5 season show. The premise being a vampire, a werewolf, and a ghost live together in an apartment, or actually it was a house, and the stuff that happens to them. So it's got kind of a soap opera aspect to it, but they're all friends, even though vampires and werewolves are supposed to hate each other. And then they move in together, and then the ghost happens to be in the house that they move into. And you get, it's interesting how they all get together. The werewolf is a nurse at a hospital, so he's able to get the blood for his, so he works at the hospital also, I think. Also, the vampire, I think, also works at the hospital. So that's where they sort of met, and they sort of hung out together, but they get the blood from the blood banks and stuff like that there, so that he doesn't kill people, because he doesn't want to. He's a vampire that doesn't want to attack people. He's fine. Just it's not like he has a soul like Angel, but he doesn't like being a typical sort of vampire. And then the werewolf, has to be locked up once a month, because when the full moon hit, he wolfs out. But other times like that, he's just a dweeby sort of guy. And so they move in together, and they both know what each other is. They know he's a vampire. He knows he's a werewolf. So that's all. And then the ghost appears of a black woman who was murdered in that building, and sort of becomes their third roommate. So they all have kind of adventures. The werewolf ends up having a relationship with another nurse at the hospital, and in the middle of a lovemaking event, right when he's like kind of turning into or getting ready to turn soon into a werewolf, he bites her, and she turns into a werewolf, and then she can't handle it, and they have that issues with that. And then in later seasons, there's a plague, a vampire plague, where the blood is tainted with this plague, and that vampires are starting to get killed off, because the blood that is in people's blood that they've been sucking on, and there's blood, and it's a contagion that is not affecting humans, but it is killing and weakening the vampires, and so they have to figure out a way to get around that. And then there's something about the house in the final season, but it was just 3 buddies, a ghost, a werewolf, and a werewolf, and a vampire. It sounds like the setup of a joke. Live together in a house and try to, interact and live a normal life when all this other stuff gets thrown at them. It was a really good series. As I said, great episodes, great stories. And it lasted, as I said, close to like 4 or 5 seasons. And my wife did the reviews for them, and it's just a really phenomenally good TV show, and that's why it's number 13. Number 12, while it does have spooky stuff happening, and is kind of a horror-esque sort of quality, it might not be considered by most people as kind of a horror series, but it is. It's one of my favorite shows of all time, Twin Peaks. It's number 12. The reason why it's not higher up is because there's much more like what you expect from a spooky show, but Twin Peaks definitely has that, with the White Lodge, the Black Lodge, the spirits that possess people, the way David Lynch shoots the wind at night, which is fantastic. And then it just goes all kind of ape shit. into the third season, where we start getting stuff about, weird zombie-like creatures that come down and kill people, frog things that enter people's mouths and possess them. And the whole thing is about a young girl who was killed and her body found wrapped in plastic, and they got to figure out who's the one that killed her. And she appears to be one of the victims of a serial killer. So they bring the FBI in, and Agent Dale Cooper, played by Kyle MacLachlan, comes in and try to investigate, and gets caught up in the supernatural world that is Twin Peaks, with all the weird stuff that happens, and the spirits that travel between people. And you have a Native American police officer who's able to give some perspective on the Native American experience. But it is also a soap opera on top of that, with relationships and stuff like that. But the spooky aspect of it is almost like a not a precursor, since it's sort of like a child of Dark Shadows. Dark Shadows, focused on the main character was a vampire. Main character here is FBI agent, so he's not a vampire, but it does deal, much like what Dark Shadows does, deal with mysterious sort of events in a regular world kind of setting. And you get the Pacific Northwest sort of mystical feel to stuff, because that whole area, Pacific Northwest down to about San Francisco, has sort of this whole sort of mystical presence about it, because the majority of these types of shows take place in that area. And that could be due to the wind and the rain and the trees and the climate and stuff like that, and just the darkness and the aurora borealis and stuff like that. So it fits into the spooky series because there's lots of spooky shit that happens. The main bad guy in the first season and half of the second season is a serial killer, and just the mystical sort of ways. Dale Cooper is a student of Buddhism, so he uses some Buddhist sort of mystical sort of events to try to figure out who the killer is. He has weird dreams that are giving him information without giving him information, that sort of thing. Miguel Ferrer, I'm sorry, Miguel Ferrer has a great line, is like, do your dance, climb up the mountain and do your dance, but find this beast before he takes another bite, sort of thing. It's a great, where he just talks about all the mystical stuff, but he says, you got to find this guy. Do it any way you can. And it's so creepy. And then Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me is even more bizarre and more creepy when it comes to stuff like that, when you actually find out who the killer is and the weird stuff that happens. The Black Lodge, White Lodge stuff is insanity, and just some of the weird things that happen and some of the mental stuff that goes on. It's just a bizarre show, but again, spooky series. It fits perfectly. It's number 12. Number 11 was, I think, a Starz show on streaming, lasted maybe 2 seasons. Ash versus the Evil Dead. Bruce Campbell reprised his role as Ash, which is the character he's played most of all, and is probably the one that he's going to be known forever as. And they did this TV show on Starz with a new cast of characters, but instead of taking place at the cabin, they have they take on the Evil Dead, in the real world sort of stuff. And you've got, a bunch of new cast, but it's a TV show. So you've got to expand the story more. So again, if you like the original Evil Dead movies with Bruce Campbell, the later remakes have been a little bit more violent and dark, whereas the Evil Dead ones, they were still kind of the precursors to the Cabin in the Woods movies and were dark and creepy, but they also had a little bit of a humor to it. And Bruce Campbell sort of brings the humor a little bit, but tries to focus a little bit more on the Evil Dead aspect of it and the horror aspect of it. And that's why it becomes the spooky series. That's number 11 on my list, because it's tied to an actual spooky movie series, which is one of the best ones to watch during spooky season. And I talked about that way back when I first started doing this. And now we have a TV show which follows up, say, what's going on with all the stuff with Ash and all that things. And it makes it just as abundantly creepy as you expect. Top 10, and we're only an hour and a half in, so hopefully this will go about a half hour. We'll go about 2 hours, and then we'll go to dinner. And then around 11 o'clock, I'll do my show, my regular show, and call it a night. Number 10, Mike Flanagan makes another appearance again, this time Midnight Mass, which is a brilliant Stephen King-esque sort of story about a small town on a lake or a river, or not a river, like a lake, who welcomes a new pastor, but then all kinds of weird things start happening. And spoiler alert, the pastor turns out to be a vampire sort of thing. So it's sort of almost like a Salem's Lot. It's like his version of Salem's Lot. Again, with what Mike Flanagan does really well, only lasted the one season. It wasn't really supposed to be a multi-season story. It was one story he wanted to tell, but he couldn't do it in a movie, which is 2 hours, 2.5 hours long. He needed 8 to 9 hours to do it, to tell the story he wanted to tell. And he got it in this limited series. And again, that's my determination of it. It's spooky series. You might consider a series being multiple seasons, but as you can see, a lot of the ones I have on here were one and done seasons or limited series, and they are effectively exactly what you want. A series, yes, conveys multiple seasons, but a series also means more than one episode. And in this case, Midnight Mass is like, again, 6 to 8. I forget the window of it. But again, a perfectly written, perfectly atmospheric, fantastic, horrific, spooky series on Netflix, which is still available on Netflix, so you can check it out and binge that also before Halloween if you want to. Vampires, cats, just the dark. It's got a little bit of a Dark Shadows feel to it also. So you got sort of a little bit of everything in there. And again, feels like a Stephen King novel, like a Salem's Lot, like his version of Salem's Lot is Midnight Mass. So really, really good. Really, really good. Number 9 is a streaming series that, again, is only going to be the one season probably, and a limited series to tell the story they want to tell. It itself is a spinoff of a previous series, and the series isn't done yet. But the reason why it's number 9 is because Agatha All Along is an outstanding spooky series, one of the best Marvel MCU series you're ever going to see. Spinoff of WandaVision, where we focus on Agatha, played by Catherine Hahn. And at the end of WandaVision, Wanda is able to put her under a spell where she believes she's just a resident of the town that Wanda had just taken over, and not one of the greatest witches of our time, who's been around since the Salem witch trials, and one of the more powerful ones, and who was trying to steal Scarlet Witch's power to become the Scarlet Witch herself. So we fast forward to this series, Agatha All Along. We're down 2 episodes now, so we'll have to catch up on those. And then there's the last 2 episodes that air on Wednesday. So it'll be completed before Halloween. If you have not seen it yet, I highly recommend you jump on it right now. Watch the 6 episodes that preceded it, and catch the final 2. I guess it was 6, maybe it was not, maybe it was 7 episodes that preceded it. And catch up on it before the finale, which is on Wednesday, because it's going to be crazy. The show is a great idea. I keep touching that button. Catherine Hahn's Agatha eventually gets her memory back, who she is, but she does not have her powers. So she decides to do a desperate gamble to get her powers back by walking the Witch's Road, which is a alternate sort of universe that will throw all kinds of horrific stuff at you and trials and stuff like that. And if you can get through them with your coven and you get to the end, you will be able to get whatever your heart's desire is. So, Catherine Hahn decides that she wants to walk the Witch's Road so she can get her powers back. And so she gets a coven together, including a former lover played by Aubrey Plaza, who is outstanding in this as Rio, and is also includes a young boy who seems familiar, but she doesn't quite know why. The devil for power, but turns out that something else completely. If you haven't seen it yet, as I said, we're still down 2 episodes. We need to catch up on them, but the ones that we have seen, Absolutely love the show. I love this show so much. First episode may get a little slow for you, but it's also because WandaVision used lots of every episode was based around a decade of television. So like the first one was like how the 1950s television was. So it was like 1960s, third was 1970s, fourth was 1980s, fifth was 1990s, stuff like that. And it was shot in the format of that TV series they were aping or homaging. The first episode apes the mayor of Whitehorn or whatever, the Kate Winslet show with Agatha as a homicide detective who's investigating the death of someone who looks familiar to us and her as well, but she can't tell who it is. And then she goes to library to figure out something about the Darkhold, or discovers the Darkhold might be it, but they're all destroyed because that's what Scarlet Witch did at the end of Doctor Strange 2. And then Rio comes and gives her powers, her memories back, so she remembers who she is. And that's what the whole thing sets up with the Witch's Road, and she gets her coven together, and they encounter the different things on the road. It is a well shot, fantastic, creepy feel. The Witch's Road feels like its own place, and is just a phenomenal sort of just a great idea for a story. And I'm pissed that we're 2 episodes behind, but we are, and we'll rectify that hopefully soon. Number 8 is is the granddaddy of spooky anthology series, and everybody knows this one. Do 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 do. It's the Twilight Zone. The Twilight Zone 1960s anthology, maybe it was 60s, black and white anthology, written by it's not Ray Bradbury. Shit. I hate not remembering things. Twilight Zone. Rod Serling. Okay. Rod Serling. So it was an anthology series where there were different one and done series that always had sort of a similar sort of feel. Follow some people and maybe something weird or supernatural happens to them, and then they have a twist at the end. Some of the best ones, the monsters are due on Maple Street, which is one of my favorite, probably might be my actual favorite Twilight Zone episode of all time, where a neighborhood on this one road, bunch of houses on this one road, Maple Street, all their power goes out, and they don't know what's going on, but then paranoia starts sweeping through, and the twist is what actually caused the power outage. Another one is Time Enough for Everything, where a meek little guy who only wants to read books but is treated poorly gets trapped in a safe, and then when he comes out, he's able to escape. The world has ended. There's like almost in like a nuclear destruction. There's nobody else around, and he's got to try to figure out what's going on. Then he realizes that's not a bad thing, and then the twist happens. There's the one where William Shatner is with a woman. It's a newlywed couple, and they have just come back from their honeymoon, and they're stopping off at a diner to get something to eat. And there's like a little fortune telling thing, and they say, hey, let's just see the hell of it and fun. And it tells fairly specific fortunes about them, and the fortunes come true. So they start wanting to know more and more about them. So they become obsessed with learning more about their fortunes. So they end up being stuck and not knowing, should we do this? Should we do that? What are you trying to tell us? And they soon don't have control of their own lives. It's controlled by this device which tells them what to do. Shatner is also involved in one of the other more exciting ones about a guy who's afraid of flying, who discovers a monster on the wing of his airplane tearing up the wing during a rainstorm, and he tries to warn the airplane people. But when they check out to look at it, the creature's not there. They think he's crazy. There's one where what if Santa Claus was real, kind of helping out. There's one where aliens come and invade and they take a bunch of people with them to live in harmony, but discover that they're actually not there to live in harmony. It's for something else. So you have all these sort of one and done sort of series stories that, it's about a half hour long, which has a builds up sort of story. A lot of it's supernatural aspects to it, or they're just kind of just bizarre kind of stories, and then has the little twist at the end, which sort of brings it home. It's had numerous iterations come back over the decades. Had a movie that had its own drama, a part of that as well. It is iconic. Everybody knows who the Twilight Zone is. Sci-Fi still does the Labor Day Twilight Zone marathons where they show nothing but Twilight Zone episodes during like the Sunday, maybe it might be all weekend long, like the whole Labor Day weekend or something like that, was nothing but, because there were so many that were made. And Rod Serling doing that, and they're like just different stories. So it's a great anthology series. It is the grandfather of all of them, and not every episode is spooky. Like the Time Enough for Everything isn't spooky. It's just kind of a little weird. With what would you do if you're the only person left on Earth? So it is a little spooky, but at the same time not. Number 7 is, of course, I talked about this, part of the whole zombie apocalypse that happened in the 2010s, where zombie stuff was just everywhere. And was hugely popular. This was kind of the impetus for it. Number 7 is The Walking Dead, based on the comic book by Robert Kirkman. And originally, Frank Darabont was going to be the guy who was going to show run it, and he was going to do the series. And the first season was fairly successful, though it did deviate from the comic book story that kind of pissed me off a little bit. But at the same time, this was Frank Darabont's version of The Walking Dead, and I didn't know if he was going to pull like a Shining, where he might just use some of the comic books as framing, but he was going to do his own storylines. We'll never know, because after the first season was very successful, the first episode actually debuted on Halloween, I think back in 2010, something like that, 2012, whatever, one of those things. It was fairly successful. However, it was not Mad Men successful. And when it came time for a second season, AMC had just given a shit ton of money to Mad Men, because that was a hugely popular show, for their new season. And they didn't have a lot of money in their budgets to get The Walking Dead enough money for a second season, particularly for what Frank Darabont wanted to do. So Frank Darabont said, "Smell you later," and he left. So they had to hire new showrunners and writers who would be able to do The Walking Dead on a shoestring sort of budget. They did. And that's why the majority of the second season, the most of the episodes take place at Herschel's farm, is because it was a one set. You didn't have to have a whole bunch of different sets built or take over certain areas or whatever. You could just have everything happen in this one area and have all the storylines converge in this one area, and it would save money. So again, the second season was hugely popular, and then Mad Men was sort of on its way out, and they said, we need more money to, if you want us to continue to be a bigger hit, if you need something to back up and fill the void that Mad Men is leaving you. So AMC acquiesced and gave them a little bit more money, and the rest is history. Ended up going about 10, 11 seasons, had multiple spinoffs, still has spinoffs after the show has ended. They concluded, I think, last year or 2 years ago. I think it was 2 years ago. They concluded it 2 years ago. And then they've had some spinoffs, which have been fairly successful. So the brand is still ongoing, but it's still considered one of the best adaptations of a comic book, one of the best zombie shows of all time, and is still a hugely popular show, as we see from the amount of spinoffs that are coming and their popularity as well. So that's number 7. Number 6 finds Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Again, people who know me know my huge crush on Sarah Michelle Gellar. This is the main reason for it. Buffy is such a great series. Joss Whedon despite what he ended up being, was still a fairly damn good writer, good showrunner. Had his issues, obviously, but the series lasted 6 seasons. Yes, 6 seasons. And became, again, a hugely popular, iconic show. And again, you have Creature of the Week episodes. You've got a big bad, so you have some of those sort of episodes where you're leading up to the final battle with the big bad, and like they do some sporadic ones, like they did the one episode where the gentlemen come to town and they steal everybody's voice, so they have to communicate without talking. Then they do the one where there's a demon that has everybody breaking out the song, so it's a musical episode. Season 2, they buy their costumes from a particular store on Halloween. Whatever costume you're in, your personality turns into that costume. Like with Buffy, she put on a princess costume from that shop. And Buffy's a tough, no nonsense girl, beat you up real good. And then when she put the princess costume, because she wanted to look more feminine or whatever. And then when the thing happened where you took on the personality of the character, she became a meek, whiny, crying princess who couldn't do anything for herself. Even though we know that's not who Buffy is, but she would take on the attributes of a princess. You expect stuff like that. Season 3 of Buffy is one of the best seasons of all time on television. So it and Angel both have one of those. And I think there was another one that I talked about earlier that has a great season also. But I don't have it. I don't remember. I was talking about it earlier and I forget who it was. Twin Peaks is another one, has a great first season. But there's not much more I can say about Buffy that you don't already know. Great ensemble cast, as I said, great big bad. Season 4 was a little weak, but season 5 definitely made up for it. Season 6 was weak because Joss Whedon sort of stepped away from it and they sort of turned it into a kind of a bizarre show. And then it actually went 7 seasons. And season 7, where they took on the first evil, was a big storyline as well. And it has its ups and downs, but Buffy the Vampire Slayer is definitely up there for spooky series, and that's why it's number 6. Number 5 is I haven't watched all of them because after a while it just got to be too much for me. But the premise itself is a Twilight Zone for the 21st century for the most part, except it's not. It's American Horror Story. American Horror Story takes every season as a different like horror aspect story to it, and they use the same actors and actresses from the previous seasons in these roles and then bring new ones into them. But it's on FX, so it's able to push the boundaries of gore and violence and sex and nudity. And each season is a self-contained sort of one. You had the original one, the first season was the haunted house. Second season was an insane asylum that also had alien attributes to it as well. You've got, and I can't remember, you have the New Orleans witches one. You've got the Roanoke one, where you try to figure out what happened to Roanoke. And that was kind of a weird one because, Roanoke is the mysterious town that in the 1600s, the whole settlers just disappeared and were never found again and left like in a hurry. So they're trying to figure out what happened to it. So there was like a group that was going there to film recreations of a documentary, but then the spirits actually show up there. They have the hotel where the evil spirits of serial killers end up staying in there, and all kinds of horrific stuff happens in there. There was the one about the election in 2016 that was definitely a diss at Donald Trump, and it was about killer clowns or something like that. And so they just do these high concept story ideas, about 12 episodes, and the gore and the violence and the horror and the sexual stuff is all up to 11 on those, and pushing the boundaries as much as they can for television. And that's why it's number 5 in spooky series, because that's all it is it is generally just focused on one story every season that is horrific, and the stuff that goes on that builds up to it, and all the horrific stuff that happens. Like the haunted house one, starts off pretty innocuous enough, but then you start, people start dying and their ghosts start reappearing, and then we start learning they're trapped in their house, stuff like that. My Aunt Jessica had a lot of roles early on in this. She hasn't come back to it in a while. They used pretty much like the same sort of actors in a lot of them. Sarah Paulson, I think, is in most of these also. And again, all of them have sort of these high concept sort of story ideas. And sometimes you can connect them. There's some seasons where they've connected them to previous seasons as well. And, but I said that's why it's up so high, is because it is straight up a horror series, spooky series, and really gives you, if you're really into that sort of stuff, really gives you what you're looking for in a horror type show. Number 4, Stranger Things, Netflix. Final season of Stranger Things debuts next year. But to the point, the 4 seasons leading up to it are fantastic. First season is fantastic. It's a homage to 1980s science fiction and horror films with a great young cast who've all sort of gone on to do bigger things, and also brought back Winona Ryder after she sort of disappeared in the 2000s. This brought her back to prominence as she's one of the leads in this. And just the kids in general are very good actors and actresses. The storyline's fantastic about the Inside Out, or the Upside Down, the Upside Down, which is a universe concurrent to ours, but it's dark and snowy and cold, and there's creatures called demogorgons around them, and everybody seems to be trying to break into it to open it back up to bring hell on earth sort of thing. And there's creatures that appear from Dungeons and Dragons stories, and just these young kids having to deal with all these horrific things is one of the best out there. Number 3 is the X-Files. I talked about this, how Kolchak was the great grandfather to X-Files. X-Files is a series that was on Fox. Probably ran a little longer than it was supposed to, and then it did a bunch of revivals later on. But David Duchovny, Gillian Anderson, Chris Carter. Again, they go between the Creature of the Week stuff, where they would have them, and it's about a government group that investigates the X-Files, which are cases that it's supposed to be investigated by the FBI, but regular FBI agents aren't going to look at vampire stories or UFO stories or lake monster stories, because they don't think that they're real. And so they have this division, and they put someone in charge who's been kind of an issue with the government, but asked for the job as well. And then it sort of has this whole other mythology to it, which really got into the way of making the series better than it was. It actually caused it to take some steps backwards here and there. They made a movie in the middle of the seasons that tied 2 seasons together. So it's done a little bit of everything. Gillian Anderson, David Duchovny have great chemistry. But again, as they got into the later seasons, both of them sort of wanted less and less to do, because they didn't really want to keep doing it, because they wanted to move on to their careers. They've gotten a lot hotter lately. But some of the early seasons of X-Files are really, really good. Some of the later ones just sort of break apart and things happen. But X-Files is definitely a spooky series. Mark Snow, fantastic score that gives the spookiness to everything. And absolutely deserves it, with the type of supernatural, all types of supernatural creatures have been involved in the monsters, lake monsters, big feet, UFOs, fire starters, the face on Mars, stuff like that. It's all been sort of involved with the series. Number 2 is Mike Flanagan's last appearance on the list, The Haunting of Hill House, one of the absolute best scary, spooky limited series based on the book called The Haunting, I guess, by Shirley something or other. Great story, great, really creepy horror vibes, very spooky. Family moves into a spooky house where if you watch it a second or third time, you notice ghosts are in every scene. You see them, whatever. There's all kinds of weird ghosts, the hanging ghost that affects the children, the strange child that's seen in the woods, and just weird things happening. And it's, again, sort of like a Stephen King sort of thing where we have flashbacks and present day stuff, like similar to It, where the grown-up kids now are investigating the death of one of their family members that ties back to the haunted house and what led to sort of this scenario. It's a very creepy, chill-inducing TV show. It's why it's number 2. Again, it's a limited series. I just watched it in about a 2-day period every episode. And I want to kind of watch it again. It's so good. It has one of the greatest jump scares of all time. And I'd heard about it, but I didn't know where it was. So I kept anticipating it. And then when it hit, it still jumped me like that. But it's a great story that early on, it seems like it's just a bunch of disconnections. It all gets connected at the end, and it's phenomenal set design, great acting, great directing by Mike Flanagan, spooky stuff, and dividing it up into episodes is great because it really, breaks things up and makes things really interesting and gives you, again, sort of like what It did, where it focused on each family member would get like a story. You would see what they're doing in present day and then what happened to them in the past, sort of thing. So it's a great Haunting of Hill House. If I could choose anything to watch, it would probably be that during spooky season. It's not number 1 because number 1 is another anthology series based on 1950s comic book. But the reason why it's number 1, it came out in the 90s, and it was a big deal. It was on HBO, so the violence and the nudity and sex, you could do all you wanted to on it. And Tales from the Crypt was a great horror comic from the 1950s. It was so horrific that the Comics Code had to be invented to make sure that it was not affecting children in the 50s. In fact, they got them, blacklisted and stuff like that when they made these things. But Tales from the Crypt is a decent half-hour horror anthology that, again, much like American Horror Story, is every episode is its own individual. Well, American Horror Story, every season is its own story. Tales from the Crypt is an anthology like Twilight Zone, where you have a half hour of just horror, whereas Twilight Zone was sci-fi horror, just human nature stuff. This is straight up horror, every single one of them. And because it was so popular, and it was on HBO, and this is the reason, probably the main reason why it's number 1, big actors of the time wanted to be in the series. They wanted to play characters in the series. And it even gave some people who wanted to direct a chance to direct. Michael J. Fox directed an episode. Arnold Schwarzenegger directed an episode of it. And you got some of the hottest actors and actresses of the time to star in these little mini horror movies. Robert Zemeckis was one of the producers of it. He directed a number of episodes, including the pilot, which was the one about the insane Santa Claus that finds a woman who killed her husband on Christmas Eve. And now the woman who killed her husband now becomes the hunted by the serial killer Santa Claus. And he also directed the one which brought Humphrey Bogart back to TV shows by utilizing Forrest Gump stuff that he learned in 1994 by taking Humphrey Bogart's character from multiple movies and adding it to the episode of Tales from the Crypt to make it look like a noir show with Humphrey Bogart doing the story. And it's phenomenal. It's a great one like that. But as I said, the reason why it's number 1 is because it's straight up horror. It was in half-hour nuggets. The gore and the sex and nudity and stuff like that, and the violence was not limited, even though there wasn't really a lot of gore. but it wasn't limited. The stories were based on some stories of the Tales from the Crypt comic book. You had the great Crypt Keeper puppet introduction and final speeches into it that added a little bit of a fun tongue-in-cheek sort of thing to it. And you got some of the hottest writers, actors, directors of all time at that time in the 90s doing episodes of this show. Tales from the Crypt is the #1 spooky series just because it is an anthology series. You can